There might be one or two that would be like, oh, I'm totally fine with the tiny little box you put me in. But most of them, they'll fight you just on principle that I'm not going to be niche down to that one thing. So when you've got lots of passions, lots of ideas, lots of creativity, so if you're primarily a writer, then we work around that. And then if you did some speaking, if you did workshops, if you had some nonfiction stuff, we could fit all of that in, and we would just we would weight it, I guess, on your website and give people paths to follow, right? But we wouldn't limit anything.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Writer's Block podcast. I am really delighted today to have Kimberly Grabas with us. She's the founder of Your Writer Platform, and she is a brand and marketing strategist who helps authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs connect with the people they're there to serve. And she has over 20 years experience in marketing and sales and psychology. And she brings a unique approach to building platforms, and her work combines brand strategy with really practical, strategic, sustainable marketing techniques. So we're really excited to have you here. So welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here with everybody.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to talk to you a little bit about something that we really love talking about here on the
Mhm.
Writer's Block, which is all about building a platform as a writer. It's kind of unique, like some of the challenges that are associated with that for writers specifically. But
Yeah.
why don't, before we get right in, did I leave anything out of your intro? Would you like to tell us anything more about yourself?
Well, I can give you sort of the what led up to it, right?
Yeah.
So we were just sort of discussing, but essentially there was a moment where I thought, oh yeah, you know what? I want to write a children's book. I've got the ideas, I've got all the things, but because of my background in sales and marketing, I thought, okay, well, how am I gonna get this out into the world? How am I gonna market it? How am I gonna get anybody to notice it? This I started back in 2013. So back then we didn't have what we have now. There wasn't all of this information. I mean, it is fantastic now for information, maybe too much information in some ways, but we didn't have that then. And I realized then that one, I could help in that regard, but it kind of worked out too. I need to work from home. There's other, a bunch of other things. So it just so happened that I kind of fell into it. And I realized, and again, this was back in the time where I didn't even know you could have like blogs were new, and that you could actually earn an income online was new. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just try this and see. And it turns out that one, I love it. And two, it was very timely to have information like that for authors and for people who are struggling, wanted to figure out exactly, well, what do you do? When should I do it? And what are the techniques, or what are the tactics, or what are the things that I can do that I can still do this and still write, right? Still have time to write. So that's kind of what started it, what feels like a long time ago. But nowadays, I think that it sort of have swung in the other direction where it's almost too much information for authors. So now we've got what I was doing before was sort of saying, okay, these are what things that you can try. Now it's more like, okay, these are the things you can forget about, put all those aside, and let's just focus on sort of the bare minimum, the foundational stuff. You've probably seen it too, that the way the market's changed, the way that not just for authors, but any sort of online creators or entrepreneurs, those kind of things, right? You're seeing yourself differently. You're having to consider this a business and act accordingly, but still have all the creative aspects to it. So it's quite a challenge for authors. And I don't envy them, but I do find it's a lot more fun than they think. And that's the fun part for me, is showing them that it can be just as creative, the marketing side, as the writing side. So
Yeah,
we'll
I
see
think
if I
that that is one of the areas that I know from just talking to a lot of writers that it's like they just really want to sit down and write their
yeah.
books, but then there's this whole other animal that you feel like you have to tackle comes to writing and publishing and creating this platform. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit like who do you usually work with? What kind of writers are you working with? And are you helping writers who are like trying to get published, or are they a lot of self-published authors who are just trying to get their book out into the world? Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, it's both. It depends on like the time period. So early on it was very new authors generally, or they wouldn't even call themselves authors. They were writers. And even if I mentioned author, then it kind of they didn't feel like they could even step into that role yet. So we were still
Mm.
dealing with just new, I'm not confident enough for that. And so they just wanted sort of an outline of how to get to where they're going. Mostly fiction at that time, and very few nonfiction, although there was occasional nonfiction. I would say it was probably 75% fiction at that time. Then it sort of, as over time, it sort of morphed a little bit into more hands-on with a lot of authors. And those authors would usually be, there's still fiction. I have nonfiction. I have business owners that are writing nonfiction for, more visibility for their business. So it's kind of, I would say it's creators. I've had artists, I've had musicians, like, so it's
Right.
creators,
Mhm.
creative people looking to build an online presence, and offline too, but primarily online, because that seems to be the trickier avenue. And really understanding what it means to, I find that it's a very interesting thing to me, because I don't feel it, but there's a lot of people that when they're working online, for some reason they're not themselves anymore online, right? It gets
Mhm.
weird, and I don't know why that is, like what exactly it is. So anything that you wouldn't do normally in a public place, like at a coffee shop or something, you wouldn't do it online either. But for some reason, that, like, authors get a sort of a bad rap for the buy my book, and they're really aggressive. They either don't sell anything, won't say anything, or they go to the opposite side and it's really pushy.
Hmm.
So basically the folks that I'm working with can fall into, they've tried and it's failed, and it probably from that reason they've either done too little or too much, or it's authors that are just launching. So usually I'll get some sort of panicky, oh, my book's coming out in 2 weeks and I need some help, right? And I'm thinking, well, you should have called me a little bit earlier, but we'll work with it. So it's sort of every different kind of scenario around, okay, now I have the book, and now what do I do? Or occasionally, and it's getting more so now that authors are aware, I need a platform, or I need something first or alongside the writing. And that's great, because to me that's a positive movement forward, when you realize this business is twofold, and there's a business side and a creative side, and they work better if right from the beginning they're working alongside each other. They don't, I mean, sometimes you do have to, focus a little bit more on one side than the other, but generally speaking, you don't want all the writing for 5 years and then you poke your head up and go, oh, shoot, now I need some way to market this, right? And then you start the marketing process, but nobody cares at that point, right? You've got a book, you're ready to,
Yeah.
publish, and people, you didn't care about them. This is usually what I'll tell my authors, is that you didn't care about them at all while you were writing the book. So they're not going to care once you publish it. So you've got
Ooh,
to build relationships the whole
ouch.
time, and say, get people invested, get them interested. And the other thing too, which is a horrible thing, but it's true, is that people are asking the question, what's in it for me? So if you're a new author, they've never heard of you before. It's a risk for them to bet on you or to get involved or whatever. So you've got to make it very obvious what they're going to get, what the promise is, right? Which is the brand idea, is that if you don't build a relationship, which takes time, then you do end up, and that's usually what I get when they're working with me, is they'll be like, okay, I've tried this tactic, I've tried that, and all of those things are far, 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 like way down the road, when you should have done a whole bunch of work ahead of time. You should have done the branding, you should have done sort of foundational work first. Tactics are the very end, and those are the things that usually are the least effective if you haven't done the first bit. So we can get into that more if you like, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm
No,
seeing.
that's really good, and maybe a little hard hitting to some who feel like, "Oh, I just wanna write," but and you can, but you do need to, like, nurture this audience that you're trying to build in at
Yeah,
the same time.
yeah.
So, maybe it would be helpful for our listeners to define some terms. Like, let's talk about what do you see as a platform? And
Mhm.
then also, what do you see as how does branding work into that? So maybe first, what how do you define a platform?
Define them. Okay, so basically how I see it, and this may not be how everybody would see it or how it would more broadly be seen in a business sense, but the way I define it is your platform is all of the things. So it would be the biggest umbrella where everything else will sit. So it would be everything, including online, offline presence. It would be all your marketing, all your branding, sub brands, multi-genre, all the things. Everything that you're doing as an author, it'll fall under that sort of big umbrella. Then you can go down a notch and say, okay, now the brand would be specifically, like, it'd be things, it's not your logo and stuff. Branding is the logo and the color palette and the expression of the brand, but your brand itself would be more like the feeling, the promise, the vibe, the expectation, your identity, kind of wrapped up into a nice little package. That's how people will associate you, your work, right? It's your identity.
Hmm.
It's what is the shorthand, I guess you could say, of people recognizing you online and off. And so that would be like sort of the intersection of, like, what you write, what you value, how you communicate all of that, how your readers would experience you, that sort of thing. So that would be the brand. Then under that, then you talk marketing, right? So it'd be marketing the brand or you, or like sort of as a personal brand, but also individual book or individual series branding. So that would, right? So you're getting narrow and
Kind
narrow,
of
and you
drilling
haven't,
down.
yeah, and you haven't got anywhere near tactics yet, right? You're still going. So you've got platform, brand, branding, then you've got marketing, and then under all of that, then you might start getting into tactics. But you'd even, if you've got different genres, then you'd have sub brands, right? So you would break it all the way down. Then you can start looking at, okay, for this particular series, what does it look like? How does it fit in the overall brand and the strategy? Then you can say, okay, what makes sense tactic wise? Does it make sense to market to this? Which social media platform am I looking at, right? Because usually everybody starts backwards. They're like, okay, I've got a book. Now I got to get on social media, and I've got to, somebody told me I need a newsletter. I'm going to have a newsletter, and oh my gosh, now I need a website. But you have no idea what to say, what to write, how, like even what platform. And that's usually what I get. What social media should I be on? Well, who you speaking to? Like, who do you
Yeah.
want to reach?
Yeah, I
And
can
where
imagine
you
that
guiding?
a lot of people work backwards
Yeah.
on that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of the smaller one. It's what we hear about a lot. Like, it's what people tend to talk about a lot is the strategy. They call it strategy. It's not, it's the tactics. The strategy, like I said, comes way before. Your strategy would come when you sit down and say, these are the themes in my work. This is the message. This is the experience I want people to have. And then you're like, okay, what do I stand for? Because you're going to get pushback on some things, right? Depending on, even fiction authors are getting, pushback on this, that, or the other. So you've got to have an idea of like, okay, what am I okay with? What can I stand my ground on? What are the things, the topics, the areas, the ideas that I like? What's my worldview and how will I present that? All of those things. And then that speaks to like what you write and how you write. So all of that is packaged in the brand idea. And then who is it for then? So and that's the other thing too, because if you haven't thought about your readers the entire time you wrote the book, then how do you know who it is actually for? You like it. So you can say, okay, well, I think my readers are going to be a lot like me or similar to, they're going to have similar interests and they're going to be possibly my age, and they'll, this is their education level, all those kind of marketing things that we tend to look at, like demographics and psychographics. But really, you don't know. So you've got to go out and kind of test and say, okay, who does this actually appeal to? I can guess. And then you get that level of traction is the guessing. Like, it's like, okay, I think this is my people. They might be here, they might be over there. And then that's where all that stress comes from, because you're like, okay, I don't actually know. And I certainly don't know what to say to them, because I don't know who they are. And I couldn't tell you if I ran into them on the street, right? Because it's not something I've spent time looking at. So all of those foundational things, who you are, who your ideal readers are, how do you overlap? Where are they aligned? Because it's not going to be everything. You're not going to find a bunch of yous out there that are exactly the same. So you're going to find some overlap, some alignment. And then those are the people you're looking for. So then you're like, okay, well, then now I have a better idea of where to reach them, where they already are online. I have a kind of a better idea of how to talk to them, right? Like, what would I talk about? Like, if you were to meet someone in a coffee shop and you've never seen this person before, but they had a little puppy or something, I don't know, and you were a dog lover, you're not going to think in your head, geez, what should we talk about? You would already be zooming over there to say, oh my gosh, I love your dog, whatever, right? So when there's interests that are similar or aligned, it's easy to find things to talk about. You don't have to plan it all out and do a whole bunch of things with that. It's sort of natural. If you're having trouble saying, okay, I don't know what to say to these people, I don't know who I want on my email, all that kind of stuff. As soon as that, I know right away there isn't clarity in the brand and who it is that you're trying to reach, because you'll know exactly how to talk to the right people. If they're your people, you'll know how to talk to them. How you might plan out strategy stuff is a little bit different, but there's not going to be a lack of conversation. There's not going to be a misalignment on how, or the things that you guys can talk about, because there's going to be interest. They're going to share a similar worldview. Probably they're going to already be keen on the type of writing. You don't have to cajole or convince or beg. As soon as you're starting to do,
Right.
and that's why authors feel so yucky about marketing, because that's what they end up doing, because they've tried a couple things and everything is misaligned. So then everything feels kind of gross and off the mark. That's when you know you've got to go a little bit further back and get the foundational stuff down.
Like, I like the way you did the tiered description of that because I think often we think of platform well, you even said, like, platform is all of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of the whole enchilada of
Mhm.
who you are as a writer and all of the like, the content and the objectives and the goals and the who you're trying to reach, what you're talking about, all of those things. But
Yeah.
then as you drill down, you're going from platform to branding to what was the third level? Was that
Marketing.
marketing? So if we kind of take the platform idea, like this is all about platform, what we're talking about, but how important is that branding element for writers, as it relates to the marketing aspect? Because I think often we think of branding as, like you said, the branding with the
Color.
ing is all of the pretty things,
Yeah.
but really, the way I've always understood and taught branding is that it's like a shortcut for the brain. It's like what you're wanting people to think about when they think about you.
Mhm.
So, could you talk to us a little bit about that? Like what are some of the questions writers need to think about to figure out, like, who am I as a brand if you're building a personal brand?
Yeah. Usually what and this is the thing, it comes you've gotta go so far back for the branding stuff because again, usually you're thinking, "Okay, how can I package up what I write?" So writers tend to not be able to separate their book, especially if it's the first book, from who they are and the writing and everything. Like, it's all one thing, and so we have to kinda tease out, "Okay, here's your book, but who are you without the book?" Like, let's say, because that's the big question is what do I write about or how do I build a platform if my book's not out yet? Then what do I talk about? What am I supposed to be doing? But for me, if you aren't interesting, if you don't have anything to say before that book is out, then when it comes out, all you're going to be saying is buy my book, right? So the whole point is what do I actually have to say? What is, and even if with a fiction book, you are saying something. There's a message in there. There's ideas, there's like I said, worldview and opinions and ideas, all of those things can be discussed and looked at ahead of time, right? Networking and all the other things sort of build from you understanding first, okay, who am I? Who am I as a writer? What is it? What is the real reason I chose to write instead of everything else I could do that would probably actually make more money? You know what I mean? Because it's you're
Yeah.
committing to something that is not going to be easy. And you know this going in. So it's not like, you didn't there is some sort of romantic side to it, and the idea of that, the writing in the cabin in the woods and all. But nowadays, like I said, most authors realize this is going to be a hard go, and so you really, really, really want it. But why? Like why? And why this particular type of or this genre? Why this genre and not any other genre? Because if you can write, maybe you can write in all different kinds. So why are you going to choose this one? Or why do you want to be in multiple genres? Because some authors they're just I can't just do one. I have to do there's these three that I must do or whatever. So all of those things have to be figured out, and it's an introspective kind of look at, okay, what is it really that I want to say? What's important to me? What is woven through all the things that I do? So if I were to start, creating content ahead of the book, what are those topics? What are those buckets that are going to be like these are the topics or the categories or the things that I tend to want to talk about? What are things that I can't shut up about the rest of the time, right? Like if I'm talking to my family, these are going to be the things that I tend to slide into all the time. Oh, yeah, Kim's talking about the whatever again, right? Branding, whatever. But it's that kind of thing that you're sort of known for. It's the type of thing that it just is such. I mean, obviously, there's a passion for it. There's something. So either it's the writing itself, it's the craft, it's the characters. There's something in there that is important. So all of those things kind of have to be hashed out. And I've got a long list of questions that I usually go through with authors for the branding side of it. But those are the kind of things. Who are you? What do you like to talk about? What are your interests? Describe the reason for like your big why as to why you're writing in this particular genre. And what is the experience in the end? Like if you get to say, which you don't, but if you could, what is the end result that you want for the reader? When they close the book up, what's happening? Are they crying? Are they thrilled? Are they moved and motivated? Are they inspired? Like what are all those feelings? And write them all down. All of that stuff. And that's the stuff that we massage and look at and say, okay, I can start to see some brand material here. Some of this stuff is going to be the things that we use to try and package in the branding side of things to review. And that's where you're going to find the colors and all those kind of things. Those are just meant to help reinforce what we've already discovered in that. The best way to look at it is, and again, you're always sort of thinking, who's the reader in the end? Who is this for? And if it's me, right? Like if it's still me in my head, I can't quite get there. I'm still going to say, okay, then I will describe me as a reader. And you can almost do it as like a character sketch, right? So the same way that you would create a character in your novel, you would be describing this persona, this person, and then you do things again, hopefully ahead of the book to reinforce whether or not you've got that right. So you're going to collect data So you would write things or do things and see what people's feedback is. Like actually get real world humans, real life people to respond to that, to tell you their opinions, to get some feedback on it. And then you can say, oh, okay, I see how they see things. I see how they're wording things. And that gives you a better idea of how the book might land or how your writing might land with these people. And you might realize, okay, these are not my people. They're not at all my people. And then you make a shift, you change things so that you get closer and closer to the right ideal reader.
So, Amy's question then, what comes first, defining our brand or honing our reader? I would guess that based on what you just said, you would say define the brand.
And we this is a thing too. The word brand usually sounds corporate. And if I could find another word for it that wouldn't be, confusing, but it's really just, well, we'll say it's a personal brand. So it's more about you first. But then you've got to think, okay, I can't really separate me from my book at this point, or my the work that I'm gonna pursue. So then the next step is to pull out all those pieces and say, okay, what type of reader will be interested in this kind of stuff? Because again, you're not trying to beat someone over the head with it. And it's going to be very few people. It's going to be less than you want and less than you think, in a sense, because most writers, the worry is, okay, everybody should like my book. And if they don't, I really hope a lot do. But you actually don't want that. You want one person that you can think of that is like, this would be ideal for them. And then you want to try and find more of the one person. So you're always talking to one person. You're not marketing to the masses. When you send an email out, it's not to all the people. It's one person that you're sort of visualizing. And your marketing kind of should sound like that too, that you're actually speaking to the one person, which is much more impactful to the one person it actually touches than getting sort of that generalized marketing message. So yes, I would focus on your brand, your who you are and what you want to do first, then start looking at, okay, now how can I verify this with a reader? Where would the alignment be and what would they like and where might I find them? And then just do a little recon, right? You're going to kind of see what are they saying. A good way to do it, or one way to do it, is to look on, comparable books and stuff, and just listen and look at what people are saying as their reviews, right? What do they like? What do they not like? What are their interests? And things like that. Those are the kind of things where you can find, it's already there. Everything's online that you can kind of dip in and see. Social media helps with that sometimes, but you really want to try and get a good handle on who those people are, because unless you do, everything, all the marketing is extremely difficult until you've nailed that down. Like, I wouldn't say impossible, but it turns into the buy my book, the generic kind of stuff that you tend to see. And just doesn't help. So it's a lot of work, but it's not helping you. So you'd rather do the work up front, right? A lot of this work comes up front, and then your marketing for the next few years, much easier.
I think especially when you're first starting out, a lot of those things that you're talking about, like, they're not automatically, like, you don't usually know those things. That takes a little bit of, like, self-discovery and some real intentional homework on your part to kind of figure that out.
Mhm.
And even if it's not like pencil to paper type work, it's like you've been living through something usually. Like there's been something you've been wrestling with. Anyway, it just often takes some time to get
Mhm.
there. And so what often happens is, writers often fall into some sort of imitation trap where it's like, "Oh, I see something that this other writer is doing. I like her style, I like her messaging, I like her visual she's got a visual appeal that I like," that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, what is the danger in that? In looking at somebody I mean, I would never encourage somebody just imitate them, but I would say, reverse engineer
Yeah.
what is it that you like? What is it that is appealing to you? Try and identify what those things are, and
Mhm.
then kind of adapt it to make it your own, because I think we're just imitators by nature. Um, but I know that that can sometimes lead us astray as well.
Yeah.
So, how would you advise somebody with that kind of mindset?
Yeah. I think the concern, it's great as research. It's great to see, okay, what are other people doing? And not just as authors, but in other businesses too, right? Anybody who's got, because there's going to be more businesses, sister businesses essentially, that will attract or are speaking to the same audience that you would like. So just, it's not just books, it might be movies, it might be, all sorts of different things that still attract the same audience. So you want to look at those things. But the issue is, if you haven't done the work where you're solid, where your boundaries are, let's say, like you've got your brand figured out, if you don't have that, then it's easy to say, well, this looks successful, I'll just do that. If I do that, then I should be successful too, because they are. So why not, right? And again, that's looking more at the tactics because you're looking at the very end result of, of things that have been done. So maybe you're thinking, okay, well, that particular social media post looks great, right? They're getting a lot of attention, a lot of traction, but it's like anything else. It probably took them years to get to that point. So you've got to consider, okay, first of all, I might not be anything like that author. My brand, truly, if I were to actually take the time to develop it, wouldn't be anything like that. They're very extroverted. I'm very introverted. Maybe their genre is entirely different, so it's not going to land the same way with your group, right? With your audience. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration. So what I'd advise is you look as a researcher, objectively look and say, okay, is this working? Is this not? Can it be applied in, like you said, some sort of retroactive way where I can, break it up and then reapply it and see if it would work with my spin, with my brand, with my own worldview and my, the way that I like to do things. Can I do that? And if that's the case, then you can. But you have to know the brand first, your own brand, before you can make that judgment call. Otherwise, you're just going to try and do the same thing. And it probably won't work for you. The other thing to think about is that your brand will evolve. So whatever you do now isn't set in stone, so that you're like, oh geez, so if I decided to be a children's book author, today, then I can't incorporate anything else in. Or if everything's I don't know, whatever the brand you decide, the feeling and the vibe, if that changes, something might have changed in your life, things got dark, right? And then all of a sudden you wanted to talk more about recovery or other, sort of personal stuff that's a lot darker, deeper, something. Everything, I mean, things can change. So you can adapt, you can refine, you can evolve. So none of those things that you decide now are things that necessarily stay with you forever. Although, if you've gone deep enough, it's going to be, that thread will still be there, right? If you didn't, like if you can switch from happy go lucky to, dark and dreary or something within a couple years, either something really bad happened or you probably didn't dig deep enough in the first place, because you can't really change who you are completely like that. So you want to go deep enough the first time around that those threads will always be, like I said, the worldview, the ideas that you have, they're going to be fairly consistent throughout your writing career, right? So I don't want people to think that you can't evolve, because it will. Your brand will evolve. So it's not something set in stone. And the other thing to consider is it's okay. You want to be as real as you can be with the bits that you do share. But that doesn't mean you have to share everything. So your brand isn't also everything about you and all your deep, dark secrets and everything, right? It's not complete exposure online.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
are entitled to your own private, whatever part you want to, you can say, okay, this part I will share with people. And so that part has to be as real as can be. And okay, it's hard to say real because I'm not going to show up in my pajamas, no makeup, and my hair all messed up, because my brand would not, that is not me. I don't even see myself as, like, when you crawl out of bed, that's not my brand. I wouldn't even say that that's me, right? Things got to be sorted before I feel like, okay, there, that's me. So your brand can be either of those things. It could be the more polished version of you, or it can be the really raw version of you, however you want. Like, and again, that's how the different brands and different people will show those sides of themselves. It's got to be real. And if it isn't, readers can tell and you will burn out. Like, you cannot keep up a facade forever. So you can kind of pretend that I'm this, persona or something. But if it's not really you, there's no upside. So that you might as well do the work and figure out exactly who you are. And the other thing I would advise is do not sand off all the rough edges, because the most interesting thing about people are the weird little quirks and the flaws, which we won't call flaws, but you know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
the fun stuff. And when I work with authors, it takes a long time to like wrestle with them to say, no, we're not, because they'll say, well, we won't talk about this. We won't talk about that. I don't really want to, I'm not comfortable sharing that. And I'm like, you don't have to share anything you're not comfortable sharing, but you also can't hide completely, because the whole point of it is to show who you are. And that I think is I think that might be the biggest hurdle a lot of times, is to share who you are, like to have the courage to do that. And then feel some of the slings and arrows that come at you or whatever, because you're really who you are, and not everybody is going to enjoy that. And you've got to be like, okay, I'm not for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Yeah.
okay.
That's true. Amy was talking about we try to shortcut the pretty things without doing the background work of defining our own brand. And I think that's really true. Like I think
Yeah.
that part is the harder work, but
Mhm.
I think that really does define what it helps us define what we do, what we pursue, what we don't pursue. I'm wondering too, like especially when you're talking about a writer brand, like, what if I think this is one of the things I've kind of struggled in my own personal writing and platform building and things like I have all of these different buckets and how do I combine those things in a way that isn't confusing to people? I think it used to be, and I don't know if it's still the, you know, word of, collective wisdom is that, for every brand or what for every business idea, you have like a different name, a different account, a different whatever. And so then what you do is because you don't want to confuse people, you don't want to dilute your brand by adding in all of these other things. Do you feel like that's still like is that still the wisdom of the day? Or if you're a personal brand, but you do a lot of different things that are maybe like tangents, spokes off of a wheel of like who you are as a person,
Mhm.
do you think that you can collectively bring those things in under one banner, one brand?
Yeah.
Is that recommended or not?
I would okay, so again, because I've been doing this for so long, I've seen the whoop, whoop, back and forth of exactly what you're saying. So initially it used to be you'd have one brand for every idea, like everything that you even with the multi-genre authors, they'd want one website for everything and stuff. Not practical. As a marketer, I'm like, yes, please separate everybody so that we can, figure everything out. But it's just not practical business wise. And it's not I would say now at this point, we've swung to the other side where it's an author ecosystem. So you are all the things. Oh, and niching was niche down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that was a big word for a while.
how do you? And the,
Yeah.
the thing is, for creative people, it's an impossibility. So there was no point. I mean, yes, some businesses you can say that. Some people could do that. Authors can't. There might be one or two that would be like, oh, I'm totally fine with the tiny little box you put me in. But most of them, they'll fight you just on principle that I'm not going to be niche down to that one thing. So when you've got lots of passions, lots of ideas, lots of creativity, to me, what I was recommending, it sort of still applies. Initially, it was like I said, sub brands. So you'd be like, you'd have your name, your personal brand, and then there would be areas. So some would be fiction and nonfiction, some would be different series, those kind of things. All of
Mhm.
that could live on one site, assuming you didn't do anything too crazy. Like there would be some that are just deal breakers. Like you can't have children's books and then spicy romance stuff or something. So you would that I was like, okay, there's some things we just can't have living together all in the same place. But for the most part, you could do that. Now it's more it's an ecosystem, like I said. So different depending on sort of a primary business, which so if you're primarily a writer, then we work around that. And then if you did some speaking, if you did workshops, if you had some nonfiction stuff, then we could fit all of that in and we would just we would weight it, I guess, on your website and give people paths to follow, right? But we wouldn't limit anything. So, but it would require more strategy. It would require more thinking because you're like, okay, well, if I'm going to build an email list, how do I want to do that? But see, now we have so many more tools. So if you want to do something kind of different, you could have a Substack, but then also have your main website and your main newsletter, right? So you could have sort of a tangent on Substack, but still build a community there. You can build communities that are literally like on School or what's the other one, Circle or whatever, different little communities. So there's just so many more avenues now. The challenge, though, is that the more you do, the more complex the business side of things get, because then you're like, okay, am I
Mhm.
segmenting people? And then again, we're seeing how hard it is to find out, okay, who am I exactly? And who am I trying to reach exactly? Well, if you have several different genres, several different business avenues, then you're planning that times however many, offshoots you have. So you've got to have a strategy for every, and then you're marketing on all those ends. And so it can get kind of complex. It's doable, but it just requires more strategy, more planning. And it would come over time. So I would recommend that you don't you plan for it, you leave space for it, but you tackle the smaller bits first, right? You tackle the one thing first. Like if it's writing,
Mhm.
then you work on that for a bit first before you start saying, because there's a ton of things you could do, but should you do them and when should you do them is the strategy part. And that's usually what, when I'm working with authors, that's what we're trying to figure out. When is a
That
good time?
that
Are
makes
you ready? Because I mean, it takes a lot. And again, like we were discussing earlier, that you only have so much bandwidth, right? There's only so, and then you still want to have a life, right, as well. So you've got to think, okay, how much can I actually handle? How much can I delegate? How much of this has to be me? How big? And this is the other thing. I work with authors too that are sort of they're either pivoting out of a I don't know, sort of a career, maybe a corporate career, something like that, or they're retired or semi-retired. So now this is sort of the passion project. It's the thing that they actually wanted to do their whole life, but they had to, make a living the other way or whatever. So now that they do it, you've got to be careful you don't just recreate the same environment that you didn't really like before. So I've seen authors do that where they're used to corporate life and hated it, but they recreate a small business for themselves that feels the same. It's got the same pressure. There's too many bells and whistles. They're struggling to keep everything up and they're not getting to do the writing that they wanted to do in the first place. So I guess that's something else to consider for your brand and your business strategy. What does it look like? What does a fantastic day look like? How much is writing time? How much is marketing time? And manage your expectations that way. How long is it going to take me to build a career that I actually want? Or am I going to starve to death if I don't get things going in 3 months, right? Two different entirely, you can't market those two businesses the same. You can't, your expectations are entirely different. And that's another part of my job is just managing, like you said before, you can do anything you want, but there will be consequences for the choices. So if you're okay with sort of a slower path, then you have more freedom, you have more choices, you have more writing time, but then the income might be slower because you're not, grinding. But if you're an author who's writing, 3 to 5 books a year or something, and you've got series and you're really hustling, well, then you might get the income faster, but then your life is very busy,
Yeah.
right? So you
Yeah.
just have to balance what do you actually want? And again, you may not know initially until you sit down and think, do I get to choose? I get to say what I actually want? That's weird.
It's your life. Yeah, you do get a say. And I think that's kind of like what we've been talking about is just really taking this like being a little bit more intentional about how we're trying to position ourselves and brand our work so that we can get more visibility. And I know that that visibility part is that's kind of the rubber meeting the road. I think that's where a
Yeah.
lot of writers live is like how do I get more people, more eyeballs on what I'm doing and what I'm creating? And so what would be a couple of ways? I mean, we've talked about some really big scale kind of decision making and kind of unearthing of some of your ideas and your desires. But what would be some like real practical things that you might advise somebody who's really like I don't know, let's say they have a pretty good idea of their brand, but they really want to get more visibility. We tend to get kind of caught up in all of what are the latest tactics, what are the latest, shortcuts in some instances of how to build a brand, but maybe we're looking at that the wrong way. So what would you suggest?
Yeah. Well, again, it would depend on depending on what you've determined, right? So some authors are going to be, okay, I don't even want to look at social media. So I'm going to look for different paths, right? There's got to be some other way other than, dealing with that. Some authors love it, right? And they will excel or they'll put they're going crazy on TikTok, right? So again, everything will stem. That's what I'm saying. Everything will stem from what you get there. But as an example, let's say you're more like the writing, so you might stick more to emails and a really great newsletter. Maybe you'll still do a blog, or you'll do some guest posting, or you'll write articles for magazines or those kind of things. Maybe you really like the visual side of things, so Instagram might be more the thing that you tend to concentrate on. Maybe Pinterest even. So it depends. It will fit. You will know when you've done the brand work properly. Things will be obvious yeses and obvious nos. And then there's going to be a few things in between. You're like, I could probably do that. But if I like to speak, then, things like this podcast would be great. Having my own YouTube channel would be great. TikTok might be great. Some things like that, some avenues or real life stuff. Maybe you want to do conferences and things like that. So there's about a million different ways that you can get in front of your audience. Most of it will require some form of outreach. So usually what I advise is like that you've got your home-based stuff. So that would be your own, definitely a website, but then maybe you'd have a blog. Maybe you would have a newsletter of some kind or another. I prefer it to be your own newsletter, but a lot of authors now are saying, okay, well, I'm just going to do Substack. I can't do everything. So I'm going to do Substack, which helps you. It's sort of like to me, it's just outreach, but it kind of feeds itself, right? So it will help you get traction because it wants you to stay on Substack and whatever. So you can funnel those people back to your main newsletter, or like I said, you could have sort of a branch that kind of generates sort of a little bit different audience, right? So it might be maybe it's more the nonfiction side, or maybe it's more that's where you connect with writers. And then when you make a little community there, then you guys can kind of gang up and say, listen, let's all work together. I've got 12 people on my email list and you've got 12 people on your email list. So let's work together. Now we've got 24 people that we can talk to, right? So those kind of things, all the networking stuff, that comes again sort of downwind. So, but you've got
And
definitely,
I think it comes down to, like, what are your goals, right? And, like,
yeah.
what are your natural giftings and where do you wanna show up?
And how does that align with your audience? Because again, you
Yes.
might be great on YouTube, but if and the likelihood that your audience isn't on YouTube is slim. So there's some of these that are they're perfect. Other ones might be like if you decided, like I said, TikTok. Maybe you think, oh, I'm going to be awesome on TikTok, and maybe you will be, but your audience is older and they don't even know how to get on TikTok, right? Mm. Like TikTok, how do I? And because it keeps kicking me out. I don't know. Anyway, so TikTok and me, we don't get along, but I've got authors where they're using it like it's fantastic. So it just again, you're looking for alignment. That was probably like the word of the day, alignment. If you can get it figured out, and the other thing too with your brand is that this might sound complicated because you're like, oh, I got to do all this work, but really you're just uncovering it. This is people don't come to me to tell them what their brand is. I have no idea. We uncover it. We talk and we question and we look at it and it is revealed. It is something that is already there and we're just going to peel back the layers until we're like, oh, okay, there it is. And then you usually get a little freaked out because it feels exposed and it feels most of the authors that I work with will say it's like I have to live up to it. And it isn't that, it's just that it's what you look like without the self-doubt. It's what objectively people can see from the
Yeah.
outside. And I know it's funny because they will say that's not really, but it's what you look like, it's what you sound like, it's who you are when you don't have self-doubt and the negative talk and the restraints that you put on yourself because somebody said something or this or whatever, right? It's without the fear, it's this is what you look like. And it's fun when you finally get to that point and you can say, "You know what? Yeah, this is who I am." And like I said, then maybe you realize, "Holy smokes, I'm actually quite good at speaking. Or I'm really good at teaching, or I'm really good at whatever." And then those are the avenues that you tend to seek, right? Some of it might be really slow. I've got some authors who are like, I'll pick people one at a time. I'm not the big audience people, but some authors are like, no, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go big and I'm going to go and borrow other people's audiences. So they will go on podcasts. They will go to these larger sort of summits and networking stuff. And the audience is already there. Somebody else has built it and they're just like popping in to say, hi, I'm just here to talk to your people and see if some of them want to follow me back to my place.
Gosh.
And
Yeah.
then, and then you've done things quicker then,
Yeah.
but it only works if you're able to do that. If you're terrified, then it comes across as, inauthentic or people can see that you're uncomfortable doing it and then it just doesn't work. So, and again, that comes into the idea that you can build the business that you want. So you get to pick.
I love that. I hope that's empowering to people listening and that I do think too that it's just a process and I think you have to give yourself some grace in figuring it out and making some U-turns here and there. Well, Kimberly, how can people work with you, find you outside of this conversation?
Oh, well, okay. Basically, I've got a whole bunch of free stuff from the last, however many years that is, 10, 15 years so it's on yourwriterplatform.com. So you can look around there. You can always reach me by email if you like at kim@yourwriterplatform.com. And the other thing, if you want to just kind of poke around and want to see sort of how I will work with you with regard to like a full platform type thing, you can go to yourwriterplatform.com and then /IAP. So it's the intentional author platform and it's the whole structure is there. So it gives you an idea of how I would work with you and then basically how I break things down. And there's a project inquiry form on there if you wanted to go further with that. But other than that, yeah, I would just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer
Yeah.
any questions or have a little chat about where you're at.
Do you use social media for your own platform or are you mostly email marketing?
Okay, so again, and this might be another thing too, is stages. So in the beginning, all the time, social media, every platform, everything. Probably the last 5 to 6 years or more, I don't even know if I can get back onto my accounts. Like I just don't use them because I don't need to because now it's all networking. It's referrals. So you'll be at different places at different times. And like I said, you don't have to. It is possible to go without social media. It's always better to have sort of a presence, if you can, on a few of them. Just to, again, because most of the initial part is you getting a database of what's going to work, what people are saying, that sort of thing. And having the professional online presence, I would recommend at least one that you have that people can find you and think, oh, okay, she's legitimate, and a website. so that people can look, because nowadays it's very unlikely that they're going to do anything with you unless they have a little bit of like look at you online and say, do a little stalking and say, okay, she's got a website, or her book is here, I
That's
can
what I
find
do.
her.
Yeah.
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 So
That's
I would recommend that. But yeah, I
uh,
I don't have to, so I don't.
that's kinda nice. You kinda worked yourself
I
out of a
did.
job.
Well,
Another task.
out of using that for, I mean, it's probably just as much time spent in a different direction. But that is interesting that you say that, because I'm building a new website currently, and it's sort of the same, but it's just broader, right? So it's not just authors, so it's all creatives and stuff. So that's sort of the new venture. And that's the first thing I'm like, so now I've got to do all the things again. I know me, but for that particular brand, it's going to be a little bit different. So I've got to go through the whole process, and I will be on social media. I'll do probably YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel, but I haven't, again, I don't know. So I have to either resurrect that or start another one. And it's the same process that I have my authors do. I've got to think of all these things first, decide, okay, where's the audience going to be? What do I need? And I will be starting with a little bit of social media, not as much as we did back in the day, but something. And then do all the things. What am I good at? Am I good at this, or am I good at that? Do I prefer to have this as my outreach? Because there's got to be some form of outreach. You've got to pull people in, right? So what are your preferences? And if you get to choose, then you might as well choose the things you like doing, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, some ladies are off camera, but I just wanted to let them have some time and opportunity if they had any questions.
Can I ask a question, or do you want me to chat
Yeah,
it
of
in?
course.
Okay.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
you did make a mention of this, and this is what I'm kind of in the process of right now doing. Is I pretty much was a devotional writer,
Mhm.
and I've just written the first draft of a full-length novel, and I'm not quite sure how to merge or negotiate or whatever you want to call it. I am guessing that my reader is going to pretty much be the same type of person that I already write for, but it's just a different form of writing. I'm kind of not sure how to like integrate the that into what I'm already my brand that's already there.
Okay, so yeah, so this would be the type of thing where you'd have to think. So you're saying, I think that they would be the same type of reader. So there'd have to be more time spent truly determining that, right? And if do you have an email list?
Not huge, but yeah,
So that you can kind of get, they're like free research, right? So you could
right.
ask just, nobody is upset, and they definitely like to give opinions often. So nobody's going to be shocked and surprised that you would have the nerve to ask them, hey, listen, this is what I'm doing. What do you guys think of that? How many people think that? And again, you're talking to one person, so I wouldn't say poll them as a group. I would say individually, and that can be the thing. It could be a little poll. It could be a little like, hey, guess what? This is what I'm interested in. I would treat those things like, if, again, if you've got a website or whatever, as brands or sub brands of the main brand, right? So
Hmm.
it's not, my guess is it's going to be a bit of overlap, but not necessarily, right? So you're
Right,
going to have to
right.
give them the ability to say, okay, that's not for me. I'm just going to head in this direction. So either on your website, you've got either separate pages or separate paths somehow for the two groups. But if one is still sort of in the works, then just start talking about it. And then maybe in your newsletter, you have a section that talks about the novel that you're working on, or just, in the social media, however it is that you're already reaching people, you
Hmm.
just slide it in there. And like I said, don't ignore them until the book comes out, and then say, do me a solid. Could you do me a
Right.
favor? Buy that thing? No. And if you get them all involved at the beginning, and then you can say, is anybody interested in being part of the street team? Is anybody interested in helping me kind of frame this? Or the cover is going to be coming out soon. Who's excited? Me. So you want to get them all involved initially, and you will get more and more feedback, probably little feedback, which is also helpful from the group that is part of your list. I don't care at all about that. I don't read novels, or I'm
Hmm.
not interested in that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But all of that is data, right? And you can't be too
Hmm.
emotional about it. It's just information, and you just say, okay, well, it looks like about half my list might be interested, half not, which is important information, because when you go to launch, you'll be thinking, okay, I'm definitely going to have to have a strategy that doesn't alienate the one group, but does encourage more people to hop on the list. And it might be, again, this is when things get challenging, is, do I want to have a separate newsletter or just separate sections? How do I want to deal with these people?
Hmm.
So it just depends on how much work you want to deal with, but also if you feel like it might be confusing, if they get, or if people start hopping off the list every time you send something out, then you get
Right, right.
people who jump off. You're like, ooh, Okay, well, that's not good. So you just got to kind of play with it. But the short answer would be treat them kind of as sub brands, but include them. You've already got a newsletter, so include those people in the process and see what they have to say. And you might be surprised. It might be everybody's like, I can't believe it. This is the best thing. I was hoping you would do that, and you'd be like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, well then,
Mhm.
Yeah.
perfect. So
Thank you.
yeah, it's a bit challenging when you start adding things in, but include the people and you'd be surprised. And like I said, it's
Mhm.
data, so you can get more and more information from them.
Mhm. Good, thanks.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Kimberly. This has been really helpful. It's been a good lesson, I think, for us and just in terms of like how to holistically look at this idea of a writer platform. And so I really appreciate the way you've broken it down for us and given us a lot to think about.
My pleasure. I really hope it's, like you say, sort of less daunting. It does sound like a lot, like I said, but most of it is work that you probably would do. It would do well for you to do in any business that you're doing in any part of your life, right? Just take a minute, have a look at what your goals are, what your passions are, outline it for yourself, and then start from there. And then everything, like I said, it comes a whole lot easier. Any marketing comes easier after you've done that work. So
Yeah. And if you need help, go to yourwriterplatform.com and
yeah,
reach out to
or just
Kimberly.
yeah, just reach out. Yeah, just email me because I'm not. Yeah, there's no. I don't do the guru thing or anything. So you can just straight to my email and say, "Hey, I need some help. Let's chat, and then we can do
Yeah.
something." Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll get some inquiries from this. So thank you so much for joining us here on the Writer's Block.
thank you for having me.